Back in the day, it used to be genuinely difficult to line up raid cooldowns. You needed to know all of the different timings of all the different cooldowns, where they line up with each other for each job and so on. Now, not so much. In this video, I want to take a look back at how many of the signature cooldowns of jobs have turned out throughout the years, and then I want to talk about what exactly it means for the game, both in terms of difficulty and in terms of game balance. Let's start with going over the many actions that have been made to fit, that honestly are just forced there to benefit from the raid buffs. That is to say, all of these are forced into these windows to benefit from the buffs rather than provide anything themselves. This is probably the biggest list, and some may surprise you, and I would love to hear about the one you were most surprised by in the comments. First up, we have Warrior's Inner Release, which had its effect consolidated to just 3 fell cleaves, and then its cooldown reduced from 90 to 60 seconds. Dark Knight's Delirium was changed in precisely the same way. At some point in Endwalker, Living Shadow was concentrated to just 20 seconds of duration instead of 24 to make sure it fits as much as possible inside the buff window itself, of course. In fact, Machinist's Automaton Queen was reduced to 12 seconds for the same reason. Dragoon's Lance Charge also moved from 90 to 60 seconds, which in contrast to Warrior and Dark Knight, actually had a massive effect on how you plan out your rotation, as you no longer have to really mess around with your order of Geistgegul and jump to make sure Life of the Dragon lines up with every Lance Charge. White Mage's Presence of Mind was also reduced from a strange 2.5 minutes down to 2 minutes. Finally, we also have Monk's Riddle of Fire, although that one came alongside some reworks to the job itself, so that is a bit of a different story. On the other side of the fence, there are also cooldowns in the same department that got increased to fit in the mold. Here we have Gunbreaker's Bloodfest, moved to 2 minutes, which was adjusted during Endwalker and came alongside a small buff to the job to compensate. There's also Bard's Raging Strikes, also moved to 2 minutes, alongside Barrage and the whole song rotation as a whole. That's right, the entire cycle of the Bard's rotation was extended to 2 minutes just to fit. It used to be 80 seconds. And finally, Black Mage's had Ley Lines also moved from 90 seconds to 120 seconds. I'm actually surprised I didn't notice, given that it moved from being a 33% uptime to only 25%. And before we get to the actual raid cooldowns being adjusted, we have the weird stack attacks on 40-second cooldowns. Here, we've had Monk's Perfect Balance since the release of Endwalker. Due to its 40-second charge time and 2 charges, it means it perfectly mixes with using 1 every odd minute and 2 every even minute. Incredible! Did you know that Perfect Balance has had 5 different iterations of cooldowns in its lifespan? It started at 3 minutes, then down to 90 seconds, then back up to 2 minutes, then down to 90 seconds again, and then the iteration we have now in Endwalker. And that leads us to the changes that were made in 6.3 to a few of the remaining outliers. Sage's Phlegma, White Mage's Assize and Dragoon's Life Surge moved from 45 seconds, an interesting and non-trivial timer to match up with raid cooldowns, down to 40 seconds, making them perfectly match with every single burst, just like Perfect Balance. An honorable mention goes to Scholar's Energy Drain. That was actually removed at one point, but then later reinstated when Scholars complained they had nothing to dump unneeded ether flow on. Meanwhile, Sages get nothing because they never had anything. It isn't missing. The main use of Energy Drain, of course, being in spending healing resources on damage in raid cooldowns. Which perfectly leads us to the raid cooldowns that were all forced to fit. Bard's Battle Voice, Dragoon's Battle Litany, Astrologian's Divination, and Summoner's Ether Pact, now Searing Light, were all moved from 3 minutes to 2 minutes. A funny detail is that Summoner's Ether Pact has been on 90 seconds and 2 minutes previously. Also, you may recall that Divination used to be connected to the mechanic that is now connected with Astrodyne. With a 3-minute cooldown on Divination, you had 6 attempts to get the correct 3 cards, but when it was reduced to 2 minutes, it suddenly started to be too unreliable, and now it is no longer connected with a random system. Isn't that something? On the opposite end, we have Brotherhood, which was moved from 90 seconds to 2 minutes. Notice how it used to match with Riddle of Fire. And Trick Attack, which was made into a personal damage buff for the ninja, and the raid buff was moved over to Mug, which, by the way, over the years have gone from 90 seconds to 110 seconds to 2 minutes itself. Can't have a 1 minute raid cooldown. What if one of the DPS has worse burst on odd minutes than everyone else? Speaking of which, red mages Embolden used to give a gradually decreasing damage buff rather than a fixed one. But what if one of the DPS can't burst as hard in the first bit of their burst combo? And not to mention poor Dragon Sight that lost pretty much all of its visual flair and was changed from a range you had to stay within to simply be a placed buff. Imagine if you wanted to move away from the Dragoon and not have the damage buff. Oh no, anything but that. Now with everyone caught up on the changes, what on Etheris does this actually mean for the game? Back in the day, the difference between a master raid team and a great raid team was in how well they could line up raid cooldowns. The difference between a great raid team and a casual one was in whether you actually bothered to try and line up raid cooldowns at all. The damage difference between doing so and not was very significant and was much more difficult to pull off. In fact, there were considerations for individual jobs whether there was a point in delaying a specific cooldown to line up with raid buffs rather than wait, especially if the fight wasn't going to drag on for long. Remember, if there's both 90-second cooldowns and 120-second cooldowns, these will only line up in the opener and 6 minutes into the fight. This meant that the difference between the best players and just the average players was astronomical in comparison to today. It is worth pointing out that back then, there were also a lot of really inconvenient optimization tricks that the best players might bother to do just to kill the boss faster, but the average raid team simply could not be bothered with. A 1 minute maybe pull timer for the Astrologian, but only if you draw the correct cards? I say no thanks. Furthermore, because jobs had very different cooldown timings, you had to work around whatever your team had, which meant in a party finder situation, you might have to accommodate several different openers and cooldown timings to fit with whatever cooldowns the raid had. Compare this to now, where all raid buffs are on a 2-minute cooldown on the dot. Yes, all of them. Most cooldowns in general divides 2 minutes. For any non-math nerds here, that means you can divide 120 by that number and still get a whole number with no decimals. It makes sense, don't worry too much about it. And when most cooldowns can be multiplied by some number to get 2 minutes, it means you can simply use everything on cooldown and it will all magically line up together down the line. Ever looked at a cooldown your job needs to use precisely on cooldown and thought, man, if only this had a charge system so I didn't have to press it exactly on the dot. But you do know what would happen if that was added, right? 1 minute cooldowns would be stockpiled to 2 minutes. 30-second cooldowns would be used in pairs on 1 minute and 2 minutes. 40-second cooldowns would be used once on the odd minute, twice on the even. Ultimately, making this small simplification would lead to your job becoming more complicated, not less. And while it would become easier to manage for a casual player that doesn't worry themselves that much about burst windows and such, the damage difference between bothering to do it and not would be significant enough that anyone that wanted to do difficult content would eventually be faced with needing to make this optimization. Two excellent examples of this type of simplification is one that we have and one that I know some players wish for. Back when Samurai had Kaiten, it was mostly agreed upon that there was no reason to try and overcomplicate things by stockpiling Kenki for the burst windows. It was already difficult enough as is to meter out the Kaitens just right. Add onto that Ikishoten's plus 50 Kenki for the burst and then also managing the remaining 50? That's too much. Now that Kaiten is gone, you can much more easily manage that Kenki gauge, so now it is much more feasible to carry extra Kenki into the burst. We removed Kaiten, which on its own wasn't that bad, and replaced it with much more excessive resource stockpiling. Meanwhile, monks have looked wishfully at the idea of being able to stockpile 10 chakra rather than just 5. Why? Because during Brotherhood, it is feasibly possible to generate more than 1 chakra in a single GCD, leading to jumping from 4 to a hypothetical 6 or more, losing out on potential DPS. However, if you could stockpile 10 chakra instead of just 5, then the obvious end result is that monks would start sitting at 8 or 9 chakras leading up to bursts. And then, well, we have introduced stockpiling again. Anything you can think of in regards to simplifying cooldowns or resources like this always leads down the road of stockpiling. A decent example of a deterrent from resource stockpiling is Red Mage's Manification. Because the melee combo itself takes nearly 15 seconds on its own, and Manification serves up all the resources you need for a melee combo, you have far less incentive to stockpile resources for the burst window itself. However, remember that Embolden itself has a duration of 20 seconds, and it is not the only one. Let's say you do the 1-2-3 melee combo leading up to Embolden and then use Manification to regain the resources there. And also have that damage bonus for the first part of the burst window where the most cooldowns are active. That way you can fit 2 full magic bursts and a single melee combo inside Embolden and at least some of the raid buffs. And here we are, back in the stockpiling section. Now, that is of course a bit of an exaggerated example, as while red mages can optimize this, it is just as likely a red mage will optimize their rotation by timing extra melee combos in heavy movement sections, as that is a bigger gain. But I do hope you can see how ridiculous optimization can get once you introduce stockpiling. Because, remember, in Shadowbringers and Stormblood, the melee combo cost 80 mana. And so, you could not stockpile a melee combo for later. It was very much a now or never thing. And finally, of course, bosses having larger and larger hitboxes makes it easier and easier to keep up the attack while dealing with mechanics. Jobs having more and more mobility options also has this effect. Anyway, that is a lot of rambling and ranting and explaining. Now, what is it actually I want to say with all that? How do we make worse performing jobs better at competing with the better jobs? Make them either stronger in general or make them fit better with the raid cooldowns. Make them easier to play. Ultimately, this means that the best solution to quote-unquote fixing any job is to make it fit in a rotation that divides 2 minutes. It is ultimately bound to happen that everything will fit into this system eventually. The only other path is to unfix the good jobs. Make them not fit very well with the raid cooldown windows. Gradually unbuff the jobs and make our way back to a less simple system. Why would we want this? Because as jobs become easier, it becomes simpler to play like the best players in the game. It means that for content to be challenging, it has to lean more and more towards the best players' requirements, making it very difficult for worse players to participate at all. Remember, back in the day, stacking raid cooldowns was more a masterful strategy that the best employed. These days, it is almost expected that you do it. In fact, it is so easy to do that all you have to do is follow the commonly known opener and burst rotations and it'll be fine. This is how we land on fights like P8S that were released at a difficulty level where certain jobs simply couldn't compete. Because the optimal rotations for the test team's jobs were so simple that they managed to master their rotations almost completely in the testing phase of the encounter. The only way to make the difference between the best, average and worst players larger and more importantly in a way that makes sense is to make the jobs less trivial to pilot. Make those weird janky cooldown lineups again. Make things difficult to optimize. Make the bosses have smaller hitboxes so the melee have to work for it. Take away some mobility from summoners so you need to think a bit more about where you're casting and not feel like a glorified ranged physical. Do what it takes to make the jobs difficult to pilot. But who would actually want that? This kind of rewind of simplicity would require some jobs to be the first movers. And do you want to be the job with a 3-minute raid cooldown while everyone else is still on 2 minutes? Yeah, I didn't think so. But I do think it is the way to get away from the path we are hurtling towards. All I'm saying is that the writing's on the wall, and my bet is that the next actions to get simplified is Dark Knight's Salted Earth, Ninja's Bunshin, Monk's Riddle of Wind, and Red Mage's Flash and Contra 6. Maybe Bard's dots get set to 60 seconds, or get removed outright. And maybe they'll have Astrologians need 4 seals instead of 3 for Astrodyne and let them hold 3 cards at a time. Now, that is a weird list, but from what I can see, that's all there is left to simplify that is still in the game. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to support me and my channel, you can like the video, leave a comment, subscribe and hit the bell to get notified when next I post a video. If you want to give even more support than that, you can also become a member of the channel. Fun fact, Trick Attack was originally learned at level 50, so you would have learned Suiton beforehand. In Stormblood, it was moved to level 18, which led to the issue that Trick Attack is unusable in boss fights until you get Suiton.